So folks who are struggling with addiction, why is this thing called mindfulness helpful? Well, as you know, folks who struggle with addiction are really hard on themselves. There's a lot of judgment there for sure. Folks in recovery would certainly have strong cravings, and mindfulness does really awesome things with cravings. Mindfulness is a powerful tool to help the person slow down, pause, and provide a moment of calm in a chaotic world before habitual situation happens.
That was Dr. Rebecca Williams on Psychologist Off the Clock.
We are 4 clinical psychologists here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado.
I'm Dr. Diana Hill, practicing in Seaside, Santa Barbara, California.
From coast to coast, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, a Boston-based clinical psychologist and assistant professor at Brown University.
And from sunny San Diego, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty and the Big Book of ACT Metaphors.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Be sure to check out Praxis Continuing Education for their online trainings. Just go to the sponsors page of offtheclockpsych.com to link to Praxis, and there you'll find a discount code you can use for registration on any live training events. So check it out.
We're also affiliates with Dr. Rick Hansen's online Neurodharma program and his Foundations of Wellbeing programs, and you can find out more about them at our website, offtheclockpsych.com, where you'll get a $40 discount.
Hi, this is Diana Hill here, and current times have really inspired and motivated many of us to want to take committed action in our lives, make meaningful change that supports social justice, our health, our relationships, what we're doing in the world. And I am interested in helping you do that. So I'm going to be running a workshop on committed action, make meaningful change in your life that's online through Yoga Soup, which is my home yoga studio that's doing some great work in their own committed action towards social justice. This workshop is a sliding scale payment from $25 to $45. It's going to be held on Sunday, August 16th from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. online. It does offer continuing education for master's level therapists and LPCs. And in the workshop, you'll get a chance to learn what committed action is, what it is not, how values are key in motivating change. And we'll use the matrix, which is a simple, quick, but powerful tool to support you in making value-based change in your life. So join me on August 16th. You can sign up through my website, which is drdianahill.com, or you can sign up through Yoga Soup's website, which is yogasoup.com. I look forward to meeting you all there.
This is Yael. I'm here with Jill today to introduce an episode on mindfulness and recovery from addiction. I had on a guest, Dr. Rebecca Williams, to discuss this issue, which is very timely because rates of opioid disorders are going up. There's been a ridiculous rise in the sale of alcohol, and the jokes about getting the COVID-19 are rampant. And these all suggest that we really need to pay attention to how we're coping with the stress of the pandemic, because for most of us, when stress rises, we turn to coping mechanisms that aren't always healthy. And Jill, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, and I know that you can kind of relate to some of that stress leading to unhealthy coping mechanisms, and that you've also seen it in your private practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there has been such an increase in autopilot, and both with myself and with my clients, as you said, that, for these last 4 months, I think we've all sort of shifted into this survival mode, this really kind of like primitive hindbrain survival mode. And we revert back to these reactive kind of autopilot places. And so I know for me, that has meant, eating less healthy than I normally do, drinking a little bit more wine than I normally do. So I found this episode really helpful. There were a lot of helpful reminders about the importance of mindfulness, that like just being aware of how we're feeling and what we're doing is such a critical step to, getting out of that autopilot mode.
Yeah. And I love that Rebecca offers all sorts of concrete strategies. So if, mindfulness really helps you to take a step back and notice, sort of make space for the feelings and the thoughts and the internal experiences that we're having. But her work really goes a number of steps further in offering sort of active strategies to choose paths that are more value consistent. On this podcast, we're constantly talking about values and sort of connecting to what's really important to us. But sometimes, if we have this habit of really unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether it's substance abuse or overeating or shopping or gambling, it can be really hard to know what to do with those uncomfortable feelings or thoughts. And so a lot of terrific strategies in here that can be really helpful in this time of stress to stay on a mindful path of recovery. Dr. Rebecca Williams is a psychologist and award-winning co-author of 2 books integrating mindfulness and recovery from addictive behaviors. Her first book, The Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction, A Guide to Coping with Grief, Stress, and Anger That Trigger Addictive Behaviors, incorporates over 60 worksheets and exercises for readers and therapists to identify healthy coping strategies in recovery. And her second book, The Gift of Recovery, 52 Mindful Ways to Live Joyfully Beyond Addiction, is a pocket coach of mindfulness skills that readers can practice every day to stay well, focus on self-care, and commit to a healthy recovery. Rebecca is a lifelong yoga practitioner and brings the ancient teachings of yoga and meditation into understanding mental health and recovery. Welcome, Rebecca. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I love your books for many reasons, including that they integrate so many different approaches, so that it's an integration of mindfulness on its own with acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then dialectical behavior therapy. And you integrate all these approaches to help folks manage addiction. So that means that you take a very flexible, compassionate approach to addressing the various complications of addiction. So there's a lot to talk about in your work, but I was hoping that you could start us off by first offering your definition of addiction. How do you explain what addiction is to patients as well as their loved ones?
Sure, let's start with the definition of addiction. That's a great place to start. Well, most people probably know addiction is a compulsive need to use a substance or do a troubling behavior like gambling, despite the consequences to either you or the people around you. So that's the quick definition of addiction, and it's not always one size fits all. So that's why sometimes we give addiction checklists out. We have one in our book, Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction, to help people figure out the signs of addiction and help them identify what's going on for them personally. For example, trying to quit but not being able to is a sign. Increasing use is a sign for addiction. Some people have blackouts and memory problems. Sneaking around to get drugs or alcohol. A lot of folks get into financial, legal, family problems, and that's a sign that we use to figure out addiction. Sleep problems, as you can imagine, health problems when they become overwhelming. A lot of folks in the practice may lie about their use, so I think therapists getting used to that folks might be lying and to try to get underneath that. Folks have loss of interest in doing activities unless they include drugs or alcohol, of course. And some people will come into our office because they're taking risks and while using drugs or alcohol. For example, driving while intoxicated, getting their first DUI, and coming into the office with that kind of problem.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important just point of psychoeducation, that the symptoms of addiction really vary. Some of them are really physiological. So there's sort of the withdrawal and tolerance symptoms. So withdrawal is if you stop taking a substance that you notice physiological effects, and tolerance is needing more and more of the substance to get the same effect. And then some of them are really behavioral or interpersonal. So you're talking about consequences in relationships or legal consequences, and still continuing to use despite those consequences. So you can kind of see a range of symptoms. The other thing that I also think is important to point out is that we're not just going to be talking about addiction to substances, although that's certainly a main focus of your work, but it's also addiction to other things like gambling, compulsive spending, and even eating. So there's a lot, addiction can cover a lot of disordered behavior, and some of it really is specific to substance use, but a lot of the strategies that you offer really apply to addictive behaviors even outside of use of substances. And I think that's actually a really helpful note about sort of how applicable your work is to like a whole range of behaviors.
Yes, life stressors, absolutely. Yes, it does cover a lot, and especially those troubling behaviors that kind of go unnoticed, like you mentioned, the overspending and gambling and social media addiction, of course, is a big one right now, and porn addiction. So you're right, it does kind of open up the gambit for a lot of different troubling behaviors.
Yeah, and we're recording, just as a point of fact, we're recording this during the quarantine, during the pandemic, and so the stressors that we're encountering in the world are huge, and we're trapped in our home without access to a lot of the healthier coping mechanisms we might otherwise have access to. And so I think it's really an important time to be talking about addiction and how stress and coping really fits into pattern behavior that's really hard to interrupt. And so one of the things that you talk a lot about, and this is sort of the crux of your work, is mindfulness in the context of addiction and recovery. So I was hoping that you could speak to why mindfulness is so important for those struggling with addiction.
Yeah, super question. Let me first define what mindfulness is, because it's been bandied about quite a bit for the last 30 years. So let me kind of ground everybody on the way I think about it, and then we'll take it from there. Jon Kabat-Zinn, most people have heard, he's got a bunch of books out on mindfulness and meditation. He's a physician who's helped a lot of people tap into the healing quality of mindfulness and meditation for medical conditions. So that was where things kind of started. He brought it from Buddhism to us here. And his definition I like, and it says for the most part that mindfulness is being aware in the present moment on purpose without judgment. Well.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Right. We got to unpackage this here. Well, most of us can learn to be aware in the moment. I mean, and we'll go over some tricks of the trade for that one. The tricky part here for most of us, including myself, is to be aware without judgment. Our minds are constantly judging and evaluating and making decisions, and really kind of all day long are on and judging pretty much everything and everyone. So the purpose of mindfulness is to slow the mind down, to take a breath, and begin the process of letting go of judgment. And that's a huge skill. But once we get it, and we can really activate that throughout the day. So folks who are struggling with addiction, why is this thing called mindfulness helpful? Well, as you know, folks who struggle with addiction are really hard on themselves. There's a lot of judgment there for sure. I mean, folks are beating themselves up all the time for a variety of different reasons. Folks in recovery would certainly have strong cravings, and mindfulness does really awesome things with cravings. I want to talk about the brain a little bit, of course. The way I think of cravings, cravings are an intense mind, body, brain desire to use. So the way I think about it is cravings happen right before a person has difficulty coping with a particular situation, okay, or person. So a craving comes, it's like a rush that happens in the brain right before difficulty. And usually folks who are addicted automatically go to the drug or alcohol or that troubling behavior as a way to cope. It's kind of autopilot. It's happened many, maybe thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of times over the course of a lifetime to do the behavior of drinking, using, or that troubling behavior. So mindfulness is a powerful tool to help the person slow down, pause, and provide a moment of calm in a chaotic world before that habitual situation happens. So essentially, mindfulness is a way to kind of move around the craving, help you stop, and then the best case scenario is to make a different choice point a different habit, and we're going to unpackage how that works in the brain in a moment. But it's nice to know that mindfulness is a way to decrease your reaction and your reactive thoughts and cravings. So that's what's cool about mindfulness and addiction. It really is powerful.
Yeah, I've heard it described as mindfulness allowing us to respond instead of react. And there's just a little bit more, it's like in that mindful pause, you have this opportunity to reconnect to your values or to make a more intentional choice, as opposed to just being reflexive in what it is and how it is that you're responding to what's happening inside of your body or your mind. So I wonder if you can kind of go into the brain biology and activity behind cravings and behind some of those habits that get built over time.
Yes. I want to talk about something called neuroplasticity. You've heard of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead and define it.
Yes, we're talking about the brain stuff now. Neuroplasticity is just a way to say that your brain can heal when you change from a bad behavior to a healthy behavior over time. That's the way I think about it. So your brain has pathways, and in addiction, it's automatic pathways that go to the drug. When you're feeling stressed, you go to drug. When you want to celebrate, you go to the drug. All the time, the brain automatically says, ooh, that feels good, I want to go back there. Now, when you're in a treatment program, or you're in therapy with someone who's working on addiction specifically, you can actually help the brain heal by training it to take a new pathway, a new habit. But it has to be over and over and over again. The new habit, instead of going to drugs, you go to breathing, or you go to meditation, or you go outside for a walk, over and over and over again. So the pathway that goes toward addiction shrinks and gets smaller and gets weaker, and the pathway that goes to healthy behaviors gets stronger. So actually what happens in neuroplasticity is that you can change your brain pathways, and that's fantastic news for everybody, not just folks in recovery, but everybody who's has bad or unhealthy behaviors can actually start the process of recovery by slowly moving to healthy behaviors and healthy habits. So that's the way I think about it in a nutshell.
I love that. And to me, that's kind of the core of behavioral health, which is that we can change habits. And by changing our habits, we can change our brain pathways. One thing, though, that I do think is important to recognize is that we can weaken the brain pathways to behaviors that we're trying to undo or change, but we can't delete them. Steve Hayes says right. This, there's no delete button in the brain. But by strengthening new pathways, healthier pathways, more value consistent pathways, we sort of increase their power and decrease the power of the unhealthy ones. So I think that idea that we can modify our brain, make it healthier by practices that is like the ones that you describe in your books, that's a very empowering idea. It's not easy. It takes effort and practice, but it is an empowering concept.
Right. And it's really just a matter of being expert at the problem. So if the problem is unhealthy habits, there's so many books out right now that talk about changing habits. And so you kind of have to read up and learn how to change habits. And it's going to happen. It does take time. I'm reading now Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I really love. And it really talks that it's just small changes can make a huge difference. And I think that kind of helps everybody feel better. And it does work really well. Small changes.
I wanted to start diving into some of the specific modules that you go through in your book. And one of the areas that you talk about is how we deal with emotions. And one important point is that we can change the pathways in our brain, but what we can't change is the human experience, right? We're going to have uncomfortable emotions. And for people with a history of addiction, who may also have a history of trauma, or who may be dealing with ongoing stressors, there are going to be really uncomfortable, painful, big emotions that are hard to tolerate. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how mindfulness exercises help individuals struggling with addiction relate differently to emotions. Can you explain this transformative idea that you write about in your book, that your feelings don't have to change for you to be okay?
Oh, can I repeat that? That is, even when you just said that, I just kind of calmed down. I felt more relaxed. Here it is. Your feelings do not have to change for you to be okay. You are already okay. So, that's good to know. This is a radical thought, that feelings are real, but hey, the key here is that feelings are temporary. Now, that's a huge thing for patients to understand and know about, that feelings themselves are temporary. We like to teach folks that cravings are not commands. Cravings are not commands. So folks don't have to forcefully change their feelings. They just have to be aware of their feelings. The way I think about it, it's like taking a bird's eye view of their emotions and thoughts, getting out of the stickiness of emotions and noticing what's going on without attaching to any particular emotions or thoughts, and keeping your feet on the ground and saying, yes, I'm already okay. And emotions are normal things. We all have them. That's the way things are going to be. You're going to have emotions. In our book, we also have a long list of false beliefs about emotions, because I think folks get really bogged down in really strong false beliefs about particular emotions. For example, here's a false belief: if I let myself grieve, I will be sad forever. Now that is a very intense feeling, just like you said earlier, very intense. However, it may not be 100% accurate. So we try to teach folks to label their false beliefs and begin to replace them with more realistic beliefs. For example, grieving is a normal part of loss. I can move through this, and to really re-engage with their center and their sense of resiliency.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just sort of go back to another quote that you include in your book from Jack Kornfield, which is, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And again, your book really teaches some of the skills for learning to surf, one of them being thought challenging, or replacing inaccurate thoughts with more accurate ones, or just relating differently to whatever thoughts you're having. And I wonder actually if you can walk us through the embracing the dog metaphor that you include in your book, because I think that is a really nice way to conceptualize both, relating differently to emotions, to thoughts, and even to behaviors.
Sure, that Julie Kraft, my co-author, wrote that piece of it, and it's really fun because she has a dog, and it was really about just the constant barking and bothering of what a dog can do, and just really get in your mind. And so the way she thought about it and the way we thought about it is that instead of fighting that dog that's in the room, to actually embrace the dog and to just find out what the dog needs and provide that for the actual dog. So it's just a kind of a fun metaphor for trying to, instead of fighting everything, is to actually embrace it and to be at peace with that kind of jumpy dog that
Yeah. And just to sort of contextualize it even a step further, the description of this dog is that it's a dog that you didn't ask for, but that just kind of takes residence in your house. And you have options in how you respond to it. You can try to push it out the door, but if it keeps coming back and you keep pushing it out the door, you just end up in this ceaseless battle with this creature that is annoying you. But if you sort of, make a place for it, give it some comfort, give it some food without paying overly much attention to it, you can develop a more friendly relationship with it and learn to coexist, right? Because if it's not going to leave, then your options for getting it out the door are not available, but instead you can learn to live with it in a more peaceable way. And it's very similar or parallel to the metaphor of the crying baby that acceptance and commitment therapy practitioners use, which Avigail Lev described on an episode we had about couples relationships, where if a baby is crying and you kind of push it away, it tends to cry louder and you're really not giving it what it needs. But if you hold it close and figure out what it is that it's looking for, then it's much more likely to be soothed, and you can again develop a more peaceful relationship with that small child.
Yes, wonderfully said. That's so cool.
I also love the concrete ideas that you offer for what to do in the face of emotional discomfort and sort of uncertainty about what to do. And as I mentioned earlier, you draw on dialectical behavior therapy, notions and skills in treating addiction, including opposite action exercise. And I thought this was a really cool place to offer this exercise. So I wonder if you can explain how you might guide a patient who's struggling with enormous guilt or shame, or even with depression or loneliness through this opposite action exercise?
Sure. Yeah, opposite action is very fun to do within a therapy session, and I'm sure everybody's doing telehealth now, so it's definitely can translate into telemedicine and telehealth. So here's how it works. Most people have an automatic response to guilt or shame. They usually dwell on it, they beat themselves up, or of course use drugs or alcohol to kind of combat guilt or shame. So what we do is we teach patients to stop before they go down that well-worn path and choose the opposite action. So instead of dwelling on guilt or using around guilt, we teach folks how to figure out specifically what part they may have in the situation. So we try to unpackage it and be in the room with guilt and shame, which are difficult emotions to have. And as well as depression and sadness, the same thing can happen. Some folks who feel depression and sadness are on autopilot to a behavior that is probably not healthy, for example, like eating too much or staying on the couch all day. So we ask folks to identify the opposite action, which might be they can learn and make one healthy new recipe a week. Or they may, like I've been doing a lot, going outside for a walk, and what other people are doing right now, being of service to others. So instead of dwelling in the difficult and sometimes painful emotions, to actually do the opposite behaviorally and explore that and see what happens there.
Yeah, I love that, because it's sort of, I think sometimes when we have big emotions, it can be hard to figure out what to do other than follow it. And sometimes people turn to substances to quell it because of that sort of lack of a sense of what else can I do. I hope it's okay for me to put you on the spot, but I am kind of curious, how would you counsel somebody who was struggling with big anger right now? So somebody is witnessing, all the brutality that's been happening and the frustration of not being able to make a difference in the world. How would you counsel them using opposite action or one of the other exercises in managing those thoughts and feelings in healthy ways instead of turning to substances?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really, that is a really important question. Hey, anger is my favorite emotion. I guess because I'm from the Bronx, New York, and I just am not afraid of anger per se. It's not one of those feelings I run away from. I actually bring it into the room when I'm working with people. I really am more curious about it than fearful of it. So, and anger is a huge part of addiction and also recovery. So that's first of all, honor the anger. That's to me very important, to actually unpackage it, figure out what exactly is going on underneath it. And it's real because there's a lot going on right now and people are agitated, angry, rageful actually.
Yeah.
So I really want to spend time with it. I don't want to sugarcoat it or sweep it under the rug in terms of what's going on right now in society. There are serious challenges. However, we have to decide what is going to be the best action for anger. Now, sometimes it's going to be opposite actions. So in other words, instead of potentially aggressively going out and being agitated in a protest, for example, that may or may not work. The other opposite action for that is it's my value to care about the community. I care about people, maybe giving to a cause that helps people elevate themselves. For example, one of my favorite organizations is called A Better Chance. It takes kids from inner cities and gives them scholarships to elite prep schools across the country. And from there, they prepare to go to top colleges across the country. So I may need to move from agitation to action in the action that makes the most sense for me. So everybody's different, and this is a tough time, but that's one way I think about how to kind of walk the path of anger and find out where you can go from a values-based perspective.
Well, I love that because you're including a lot of the skills that we've already talked about. And again, there's many more, but you start with mindfulness and making space, paying attention non-judgmentally to what that emotion is telling you, and honoring it as important. And I think that is such an important place to begin. And what you're saying is that the anger can be activating in a positive way, but that it tends to be more positive if we're clear on, if we pause and clarify for ourselves what it is that is most important to us. But of course, individuals lost in addiction can have a hard time connecting with core values. So I wonder if you can actually offer up some tips for folks who may have a hard time getting in touch with their values.
Sure, yeah. Values are everything. I mean, in terms of moving in a action-oriented way, that's going to be the most healing for your heart. So one of the exercises we have in our workbook is called Uncover Your Values. And we go over 14 value categories, similar to what you guys do in ACT. We talk about the value categories of family, work, financial, faith, sobriety, friendship, intimate relationships, health, community, and others. So we actually have the client kind of rate what's their most important value, or top 3 values. We want them to rank order the values and to figure out what's important right now. In other words, in the present moment, similar to the mindfulness direction that we have. And then we have the clients go back and identify what the value means for them. So for example, if it is community, if that's the highest ranking one right now, we explore what that means and how they would like to spark this value in recovery. So now that their folks are in recovery or early recovery, what is going to spark moving into community for that person? We want to know what actions they have taken in the past that show that the value is important to them. We want to know what actions they would like to take today to focus on the value of community. So we really want to get a sense of their self-efficacy from experiencing positive community interactions in the past and how that's elevated them. And we want them to focus also on the present moment. And if folks get off course, which everybody does with regard to values, what actions can the client or patient take to get them back in line with what is most important for them? So constantly reviewing values, figuring out what the top ranked ones are, and really unpackaging what worked in the past and where we want to go today to re-engage that particular value.
Yeah. I think that is important to just validate that everyone gets off course with values, because those emotions can really cause us to act in ways that are less mindful and less consistent with who we want to be in the world, because they're so powerful. And I really love that example of, you know, if anger is sort of telling you, like, my community and standing up for my community and standing up for the safety of my fellow human beings is so important to me, that you can sort of pause and ask yourself, what are the most value consistent and effective ways that I can act in this moment, recognizing that, you know, from time to time you may go off course, but you can always pause and come back to asking yourself that question. We'll link to that organization that you mentioned, because that sounds like a really wonderful one.
I'm a graduate of that organization, so
is that right?
A fondness in my heart for a better chance. Yes, went from growing up in the Bronx, received a full scholarship to a boarding school in Boston, and the rest is fabulous with a lot of hard work. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
Oh, what an inspirational story. I also wanted to talk a bit about grief, which I really think is tied to anger. You discuss grief a lot in your mindfulness workbook, and I wonder if you can speak a little bit to why grief is so important to look at in the context of healing addiction.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I really want to unpackage grief a bit. The reason why both of our books focus on grief and loss is because we didn't see anyone researching or talking about loss and the impact loss has on addiction, and the impact addiction can have on more losses. So we really, Julie, my co-author, and I really spent a lot of time talking about loss and grief. Now, for me personally, similar to other psychologists who study and practice in the area that is familiar to them, I came to this on a more personal note myself. For me, my mother experienced so much loss in her life, even before I was born. She managed her pain and grief by using alcohol and smoking a ton of cigarettes. So growing up, I knew there was something wrong, but losses were never discussed in my household. And people don't really want to talk about losses, obviously, right? So
well, because it's so painful, so we want to push pain under the rug so that we're not so uncomfortable.
Exactly, and that's what happened to in my family and probably a lot of other families. And however, the consequence of pushing it under the rug, like you said, is that behaviors start coming up that are trying to like soothe the grief and the loss, but those behaviors, at least in my experience, tend to be, or for my family, was addiction. So it's all intertwined, and I really wanted to unpackage it. And so that's kind of my journey to get to this idea of really understanding the importance of loss in addiction. So many patients struggle with many losses. I mean, working at the hospital, there was folks who had multiple losses from being in the military and having losses coming out of that, as well as in my private practice, multiple losses. And we even have a checklist in our book. We have a lot of checklists because there's so many losses that folks don't even think about, you know. Even if you move, for example, and you lose all your friends when your family moves to another location, folks said, oh my God, that's right, I lost all of my friends. So that's why talking about losses and going through checklists and understanding what personally were the losses that your clients have had is extremely helpful. And especially now, there's so many losses that are going on in our society, not just a loss of health that some people are feeling, but actually loss of loved ones. There's loss of mental health. I'm super concerned about the frontline mental health and medical workers, of course. There's a loss of fairness. There's a loss of justice. So we urge folks to reclaim their center point and honor the losses, talk about them in therapy, and navigate through so that you have new ways eta cope with losses that don't have to do with using drugs and addiction again.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just add to that. I think that some of the times the losses can be much smaller, but you still feel them, right? So loss of freedom to go out to a restaurant, or loss, I mean, which is very, very small, but loss of help to take care of your kids, loss of ability to interact with coworkers, or loss of free time, right? Because we're home and always working and parenting if you are a working parent. On top of that, I think sometimes we can make ourselves feel guilty for feeling the discomfort of the loss. We can say things to ourselves like, I shouldn't be struggling so much, you know, other people have it worse, and then we can sort of shame ourselves, which contributes to the pain that we experience. So I think the loss can be really big and obvious, like the loss of a family member, and obviously that needs to be honored, but sometimes even the smaller losses need a little bit of our attention too, and certainly they need our non-judgmental awareness, because as you're noting, it really can lead to a propulsion to soothe the loss in sometimes unhealthy ways with addictive substances or addictive behaviors.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I went out to a restaurant for the first time for my birthday here in Georgia, and I told it was an intense experience. I was so surprised. I was almost in tears. And then I told my friend, hey, I went out to a restaurant for the first time in 10 weeks, and she started crying. I mean, we're just talking about going out to eat lunch. It was really pretty intense and powerful. So yes, the energy around the loss of not being able to go outside and not, being able to connect is profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're looking for a great way to support us here at Psychologists Off the Clock and make your life easier and healthier, you should go to my new favorite online store, Thrive Market. Thrive Market carries all your grocery and household essentials with the convenience of getting everything online and then quickly shipped right to your door. And right now, you can get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift if you go to thrivemarket.com/POTC. I love that I can use specific filters to curate my shopping experience so I can find organic meats and low sugar snacks for my kids. Plus, when you join, they give to a family in need. How cool is that? So join in on the savings with Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. Go to thrivemarket.com/POTC for 30% off plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/POTC. thrivemarket.com/POTC.
I know I talk about my kids a lot, but I also have two adorable dogs, Tilly and Hazel. We love to spoil them, which is why we love Whole Life Pet. Whole Life Pet makes single ingredient treats, meal mixers, supplements, and hydrating snacks for both dogs and cats. And if you try out Whole Life Pet, you're surprising your pets with fun new flavors while also supporting Psychologists Off the Clock. Visit wholelifepet.com and use promo code POTC to get 25% off your first order with free shipping over $50. When I open the Tuscan Blend Bistro Bowl meal mixer to add to Tilly and Hazel's food, they start wildly sniffing and can't wait to dig in. The best part is Whole Life Pet uses a freeze-dried process that locks in nutrients and freshness, and they never add chemicals, additives, preservatives, or anything artificial. Visit wholelifepet.com and use promo code POTC to get 25% off your first order with free shipping over $50. If you're unsure about what to try, you can fill out their short questionnaire by clicking the red Start Today button on the home page. It will ask you a few questions and make custom product recommendations for your pets. Visit wholelifepet.com and use promo code POTC to get 25% off today.
And then I wonder too, if it's okay for me to again put you on the spot and just share a little bit more about your personal journey. So you were talking about how you witnessed your mother using substances and cigarettes to soothe her own losses. And I'm just curious for you, how did your awareness of the connection between loss and addiction come? And then how did you sort of take that as a part of your journey into treating addictive disorders?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely knew something was wrong in my household, aside from normal growing up stuff. I knew there was a deep, deep divide between my mother's functioning and myself. And so I really started studying psychology in high school to really, the basics, to really just kind of figure out what's going on. Why is this distress so intense? Luckily I was able to have good mentors and good teachers to actually move me along in the field of psychology. And I went to college and majored in psychology, 4 more years of trying to figure things out and learn. Master's degree also in psychology to really fine-tune my understanding of loss and grief. And of course the PhD program is another venue to really unpackage mental health conditions and how they impact addiction. So a lot of the journey is just really month by month in school, just unpackaging what works for people to be well and what doesn't work. Frankly, I have to admit that I've been doing yoga for 35 years. And it has saved my life and in my mental health, because when things were unbalanced, I was able to reflect back on my yoga practice or complete yoga. And I've taught yoga for 20 years also. So not only just being a student, but also being a teacher keeps me in the game. So that was another way to actually balance my mind, calm down, and be able to understand the journey of mental recovery and addiction recovery.
That's such a powerful story in the way of turning suffering into meaning. And I'm constantly thinking about that. There's many people have, I'm sure, heard of this book or read it, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I love this idea that when we encounter suffering, that one of the most meaningful things we can do is turn it into a path towards healing and helping others. And it sounds like that's really what you did, which is, I think, just inspirational.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the common social problems that I think are really important to discuss right now. Right? There's sort of like a lot of the worldwide social problems, and then there's also the social problems that occur inside of the confines of our homes where many of us are trapped. I kind of think of quarantine and what's going on in the world at large as like just this pressure cooker, this interpersonal pressure cooker. And so I think that, whatever social problems exist naturally are just exponentially greater during this time period of quarantine and racial injustice coming to light more. You talk a lot about common social problems in your book. What do you see as some of the most common social problems that interfere with recovery from addiction?
Yeah, I would say right now, the most common social problems is loneliness and isolation. There's a lot of social problems that we can unpack, but I do want to focus a minute on how we are a social being, and right now, most of us are really just on our own, with our own mind, in our own home, with our clutter, with our children, that are also having their own struggles. So there's a sense of loneliness. However, I do think there's an opportunity in that loneliness to kind of really reflect on who we are, what our narrative is personally, and how to move forward. I don't think we're doing that enough in the social realm, because the screens are one-dimensional, but I do think this is a real time to get a little more personal with ourselves. In terms of addiction and recovery, obviously AA and NA, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, are extremely have been helpful for people for decades. Now folks can't go to their AA or NA meetings in person to break isolation and loneliness. There are AA and NA meetings online, which is really important, and folks should be reaching out to their sponsors, mentors, friends in recovery. So the most important piece is a twofold thing. One is to understand yourself with self-awareness and self-compassion. And the second thing is to begin to break the isolation in a very thoughtful way in terms of recovery from addiction, and really take that extra step to connect with someone who may also be struggling with social isolation and early recovery from addiction.
Yeah, so it is harder to reach out and connect with people, but I think you're pointing to, some resources that people can take advantage of. And, the fact that online meetings are taking place is a resource that people can take advantage of. And I think that's really important for folks to know. Mm-hmm.
Were you thinking of some other social problems that we're bumping up against right now?
Yeah, so I do a lot of couples therapy, and I think that you can be in the house with others, as you're mentioning, with your kids or with your partner. And if there's tension between you and others who you're with, that can be a real pressure cooker and can drive people to say, I don't have an outlet or a non-judgmental person to chat with about how it is that I'm feeling. And then substances become an easy way to soothe whatever it is that you're feeling, because it feels like you don't have anywhere else to turn. Yeah. And I think, even outside of addictive substances, I think people across the gamut are really experiencing that we're uncomfortable in our homes. We're feeling kind of trapped. We're feeling pretty stressed out. and we're looking for soothing. So many people are turning to, carbohydrates and snacks, or, binging out on TV just to kind of check out of the discomfort that they're feeling, and then certainly turning to alcohol or other drugs to get that sense of soothing, because, we're feeling so uncomfortable in the relationships that we have accessible to us and unable to access the ones that might be more soothing.
Yeah, you make a really good point about being in isolation with somebody, your partner and family. And what works for me is kind of to step up the self-care stuff, to step up the meditation, the home yoga practice, the solo walking if you can get outside in nature, and to really kind of activate that self-care piece that's so important. And actually, to me, the self-compassion piece in a relationship is really important too, believe it or not. So in a relationship, to have compassion for yourself, to treat yourself like your best friend would treat you. And if you're going through a rough patch with your partner, to say, you're going through a rough patch, it's okay, stay in the game, it's going to be all right.
Yeah, I've told all my patients and talked a lot about this with colleagues and friends, that self-compassion is something that I've been turning to more and more during this difficult time period, because it's one of the few things that really is reliably available, is that kindness that you can send to yourself, that sense of common humanity that we're all struggling a lot right now. And then that ability to just kind of be mindful of whatever it is that you're experiencing with, openness and non-judgmentalness, and making space for it. So I think that is a really powerful tool that we can always turn to, which makes it really powerful when not a lot of other things aren't available.
Right, absolutely.
I do love that you take this $1 million question head on of what is the best time to start recovery. So we're talking about addiction and recovery during a very intense time in the world. And some people might say, now is not the best time, because there is such challenge to coping well, right? Because the world has gotten so restricted and so difficult. So what is your and Julie's answer to this important question of when is the best time to start recovery?
Well, I think we have $1 million answer to your question. Your brain would like to start today. Your brain is that incredible computer up there that is really working so hard to try to make sense of everything and file everything and put everything in its place. However, as we mentioned earlier, it needs new pathways, and it needs pathways of wellness and healing. And again and again, repetitively, to really return to some healthy behaviors and healthy healing activities. It's that ability to choose that is going to be your best friend right now. So being able to choose wellness, resiliency, self-awareness, self-compassion during these difficult times, instead of choosing, the autopilot of checking out and numbing out with drugs or alcohol or harmful behaviors, is going to hold you for the long haul. So the answer to the question of when is the best time to start: today.
Well, and I wonder if you can offer a go-to practice for managing the stress that might come up as we turn towards recovery, as we turn towards beginning the journey into health today. What are some things, what is sort of like one go-to practice that you recommend for people who sort of anticipate a pretty difficult road ahead with trying to change those behaviors?
Yeah, I keep falling back to what you just mentioned and what we talked about a moment ago. Number one, honor where we are and what is happening right now. It is happening, and we must be in the present moment with it. My personal go-to practice for myself is self-compassion. We talked a little bit about what self-compassion is. It's just that hand on the shoulder to say, hey, it's okay, you're going to make it through this. Treat yourself well today. Give yourself something enjoyable and healthy that's going to sustain you for today. And it could be just taking a moment with the computer off and the television off, the lights are off, and you close your eyes, you lay down, and you put a cold compress on your forehead. And that may be what you need today. And that's self-compassion, where you give yourself what you need. There are going to be tough times, and you have the mental resources to get through this. I like to say to myself, what is the most loving thing to do right now? And I actually act on that. I kind of take a moment, I breathe, I ask myself, when I'm stressed, I ask myself, what is the most loving thing to do for yourself right now? And I actually just walk down the path and do that. So we talked about ways to refocus on breathing, inhaling and exhaling is really just the beginning part of the answer to that question. And for your patients that are managing relapse right now, I really, recommend to have your patients ask themselves, what is the most loving thing to do right now?
Yeah. This kind of reminds me of a recommendation that came from a non-therapist in a book I just read, Untamed by Glennon Doyle. It's a really fun book and pretty inspirational. It was a great read. And she talks about creating sort of a spreadsheet for yourself with two columns. One is, the first column is easy. So things that you do to soothe yourselves that are easy, but that tend to create this vicious cycle for you. Things like engaging in unsafe sex, or turning to substances, or eating too much, or spending too much money. So that kind of falls into the easy category, where you'll feel better in the short term, but that there will be bigger problems down the road as a result of engaging in those behaviors. And then the second column is a reset column. So these are behaviors that help to soothe you in the moment. They might be a little bit harder, but they reset you on a path of health and healing. And some of the actions that you just mentioned would fit in under that. So a mindful walk, or breathing, or grounding, feeling your connection to the earth. And one of the recommendations that I often give patients is making them available to yourself when you're not in a high craving period. Because when those emotions are big, or when you're sort of feeling short fused, it can be harder to generate those ideas of what you can do, the healthy activities. And so really engaging in some brainstorming when you're feeling calm and a little bit more open to generating ideas can be a helpful strategy as well.
It's a great idea to have that column, that checklist in that column to set yourself up. The other thing I really love is daily affirmations. I think this was kind of popular in the 80s, and I was like, yeah, this is great. And it kind of went away, and now I feel like it's back again. I love daily affirmations. In fact, our book, The Gift of Recovery, has 365 daily affirmations to say out. I recommend folks say them out loud, record them in their phone, say them to themselves, play back the recordings 5 to 10 times throughout the day. I mean, to hear your own voice, give yourself a positive message of affirmation in recovery is extremely powerful.
Yeah, I loved the affirmations that you offer in your book, and I love the recommendation to put them in your phone and have your phone remind you of them, because then they become more an integral part of your day. And I'll just sort of read one of my favorites, because I do think that engaging these almost as like mantras can be really helpful. So if the small stuff seems big, I can change my perspective. I can bring it back to its actual size. I mean, that's just one of the examples of accepting everyday frustration and changing perspective. But there's a whole host of them. So another example is, even my strongest feelings in recovery are not permanent. And again, programming them into your phone and reminding yourself of them is such a terrific way to sort of keep your mind on a healing path. I wanted to end by asking you what kind of tips you offer individuals who love somebody who's struggling with addiction, or who love somebody who's early in their recovery, to integrate their mindfulness in supportive, loving ways.
Yes, such a good question. Number one, try not to fix the other person. That I know there's like a real rush to fix and change and make different, another person, but really for the person who loves someone in recovery, the healing is an inside job. It really is about how you're going to be, what your narrative is, what you choose every day to be well and resilient, no matter what is going on, because you need to do that anyway to be well. So as long as the person who loves another person in recovery is working on their own healing, I do think that there's a pathway to engage in maintaining being well over the long haul, because recovery from addiction is a long journey. It's not a one fix and done. So you really have to think about this as training yourself to be well for the long haul. So I do think meditation and mindfulness is helpful for the loved one. I do think the psychotherapy or telemental health is helpful for the loved one. And one of my biggest things that I think is kind of cool to think about is when you're doing therapy with a loved one of someone who's either actively using or in early recovery, I like the fact of the patient teaching the therapist a mindfulness technique. In other words, the patient can actually learn techniques on their own or come back and the therapist can teach the technique to the patient. But the key in terms of understanding from the heart is, and it's fun too, is to have your patient teach you a mindfulness skill or a meditation skill in the telemental health experience. So, hey, give it a try. It's kind of cool. And it's something that the person who is a loved one can actually hold as their very own. Hey, I taught my therapist this today. It's pretty neat.
And that mimics, I think, a lot of the themes that I talked about in a previous podcast episode where we talked about family approaches to dealing with addiction. And I love that saying that healing from addiction is an inside job. It belongs to the person who is trying to change their behaviors, but we can act in loving and supportive ways that are us taking care of ourselves mindfully, lovingly towards ourselves, and supportively towards the other. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. You're a great podcaster.
Thank you for listening to Psychologist Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We'd like to thank our interns, Dr. Catherine Foley-Saldana and Dr. Katie Lear.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're having a mental health emergency, dial 911. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources of our webpage, offtheclockpsych.com.